Hello, I'm Phil Jackson, and this is The Rutles Are Here, a collection of interviews and stories from the band members and associates of the most infamous band in the world, the Rutles. Who are the Rutles, I hear you say? Well, you might have to go on the Google machine and discover that all for yourself. In this next hour of interview and chin-wagging, I'm chatting to a man who's won BAFTAs and Emmys for all his work in composing and arranging and being a conductor and playing the saxophone for many years, working with all the most famous names you've ever heard of, records, film scores, you name it. He's also in the unique position of being a Ruttle, albeit hidden away by his fantastic arrangements on the Rutles records. His new book, Hidden Man, is out now this February. Who am I talking about? Please welcome Mr. John Altman.
Okay, well, hello to all the people out there in Radio Land. I'm joined by a man, a myth. Here he is. This is Mr. John Altman. And if you don't know who John Altman is, I think he's going to fill you in right now a little bit. But he's a man who's been spending his whole life playing and arranging and composing and all kinds of things. And so how are you today, John?
Yeah, not too bad, thanks.
We were just chatting before recording about your stamina and your blowing, and you're a saxophone man, and I guess you can play other instruments as well, can't you?
Yeah, I'm a very bad pianist, and even worse now, clarinet player and flute player, because I sort of jettison them. What sort of happened was my uncles were famous arrangers, and I was sat with one of them in Hollywood, and he said, "Have you given up playing yet?" And I said, "No, what a horrible thought." He said, "You will." And he was like Britain's top jazz trombonist before the war, wonderful player, and he'd stopped playing completely.
Oh.
And, I don't think he even knew where the trombone was. He put it behind an armchair and forgot it. And at that moment, I thought, I never want to do that. I got into music because I wanted to play an instrument, it's great conducting and writing, but the playing fuels the writing that fuels the playing.
Sure.
And it's like cutting off an arm. So I compromised, and I let the flute go and I let the clarinet go. It's very funny. I picked up a flute on a recording session a few years ago, and nobody really then knew that I played flute. I was conducting, and I was in Hollywood, and the principal flautist of the LA Philharmonic, was on the session. And I just very naively said, "Oh, that looks nice. Well, how does it work?" And she was sort of showing me what to do. And I said, "Can I have a turn?" And I took it.
Like magic.
Yeah, and she was astonished. And the only other time I played it in years and years, I was producing the Moody Blues for a TV show called Saturday Night Live, I think it was. Ben Elton and Harry Enfield show. I was the musical supervisor and producer. And for one reason or another, the Moody Blues, who I was very friendly with Justin anyway, and they were doing Nights in White Satin, and their flute player couldn't play the flute solo. He kept messing it up. Sort of 40 takes. And I said to Justin, "Is this ever going to be right?" And he went, "No, I don't think so." So I sort of secretly went out there and picked the flute up and said, "Oh, that's a nice flute." And he said, "Do you play it?" And I said, "Well, I used to." And he shoved it in my hand and said, "Well, you do it then." So it's on YouTube, he's miming to my flute playing. That's the only time I've touched it, really.
So that sounds like a very informal way of introducing yourself to music. But did you have a lot of schooling in music apart from growing up in it?
No, I mean, I had piano lessons from 7 till 11, and I made an unfortunate mistake. I mean, it had to be. My piano teacher got married, and I started at City of London School. And so I went to the music master at the school for piano lessons. And first lesson, he said, right, play something. And he said, right, you're sitting completely wrongly. Your fingering is all over the shop. You're slouching. You should bend your fingers. You're not articulating properly. We're going to start again from the beginning. And I'd had 4 years of piano lessons. And I went, oh, no, we're not.
Yeah.
Got home and said, I don't want to do this anymore. And my parents were great. And they just said, okay, stop. And that was the last music lesson I ever had. I haven't even got music O level.
Wow.
And I taught myself saxophone. I like to think I taught myself arranging and composing, but I think it was always there because, as I said, my uncles, Sid Phillips and Wolf Phillips, were famous arrangers and musicians, and they also never had lessons.
Yeah.
So I think there's a gene that sort of made music an open book. And when I discovered the family's 78s, when I was 3, I didn't sort of throw them against the wall or try and break them in half or make flower pots or something.
Yeah.
I played them. And as far as I was concerned, never any stylistic, Count Basie went into Borodin, went into Hank Williams, I made no differentiation. And I imbued the fact that, I didn't know that there was an arrangement, a solo, a key change. I just heard the whole record and I could hear everything that was going on. So I could say, oh, yeah, the bassoon is doubling the cello for 8 bars and then he drops out. And there's a flute and clarinet in unison there playing an octave apart, and the strings are open. And I could hear all this, which was, to me, not unusual, but obviously was bizarre for anyone else.
Yeah, well, it sounded like you were born to do it. There you go. It's and on the side of writing it, did you pick that up from your uncles as well?
I must have done. I mean, as soon as I started, reading piano music, I knew how to read music.
Yeah.
And then somehow I could always write it down. I mean, it sounds like alchemy or magic because I didn't get books out and say, how do you write out an arrangement? I just sat down and did it.
Yeah.
Which is very, very bizarre. I mean, my first real arranging gig was for record companies and the BBC, transcribing arrangements from cassettes. So if the Stylistics or Don Williams or even Telly Savalas came over to London, they wouldn't carry a sheaf of music under their arms.
Yeah.
They'd just fly in and they would be on the Two Ronnies or Top of the Pops or Morecambe and Wise or the Tom Jones Show or, variety shows, basically. And I would take down the arrangement from a cassette. Okay, the strings are doing this or whatever.
Yeah.
And then I go, oh, yeah, well, Parkinson hasn't got, strings. Well, he did have, whoever didn't have strings, they've just got woodwinds. So I would adapt the string arrangement to fit the bands that were on the telly.
Right.
So, and somehow that made me an arranger because I imbued everything that people did. I would hear a Nelson Riddle chart. Like, oh, right, yeah, that's good. I like that. I'll remember that. I'll do that myself. So that's how I became an arranger, by default.
Well, that's brilliant. I'm younger than you. And I'm always looking back.
Everyone is.
It's very easy now to look back in retrospect in a world where, everything's available and everybody takes in everything, it seems, in the same way. And back then, especially if you're working in different areas, it's most people have either a hierarchy in their brain about classical music or jazz music or pop music, and they don't cross very much, do they?
No. I mean, the interesting thing was that I think I got a lot of the cast-offs that most of the BBC arrangers had come out of dance bands.
Yeah.
And they didn't want to know about funk or country music or, rock and roll or anything like that. So it was, I'll give it to the young bloke. He knows all that stuff. So I wound up with as I say, the stylistics. I mean, even when I joined Hot Chocolate, you know, when we auditioned for the band, they said, "Oh, we haven't got any of our music," and I said, "Oh, don't worry, I'll take it off the record," which I did.
Yeah,
you know, I wrote it all that. And then at the rehearsal, they produced the music and said we had it all the time. We were just seeing how committed you were to doing the gig. Because they'd had another horn section come in before us. Yeah. And the guy said, "Where's the music?" And they said, "We haven't got it." And he said, "Oh, well, we can't rehearse without music." So they realized that, you know, that they were going to get somebody who was on their side, as it were. And then, well, it's a funny story. Our first gig was at Salford University, and the coach broke down in the car park, and it was like a scene from a Beatles film because "Sexy Thing" was top of the charts.
Right.
So we're sitting in the coach trying to leave, which won't start, and the screaming kids are sort of shaking the bus from side to side. So Errol basically, you know, hit the seat and said, "We're not doing this anymore. We're taking our own cars." So I don't know what the sort of why the logic panned out, but I travelled with him all the time,
right?
In his green Cadillac that became the subject of you know, "Heaven is the back seat in my Cadillac." It was a true story. But one day, you know, we talked about everything, and one day he said to me, "You know, the guy who writes our record arrangements for Mickey Most is great, you know, great arranger, great musician, but he's a jazzer, which is fine. But we want to be like Kool and the Gang or Earth, Wind and Fire. We don't want to be a jazz group, you know, we want funky." And I said to him, "Well, look, I'll rewrite your horn charts. I don't mind," which I did. And they loved them. So suddenly I had a validity as being an arranger, which is very funny.
Yeah, and it is those moments where you're playing with people in a band, and suddenly people put that stamp on you, and you have that realization that well, I am this person. This is what I am. This is what I'm doing.
But it was never, I mean, particularly intentional. I mean, I never sort of went through life, you know, thinking I have to become an arranger. I have to write film music. It happened, you know. "Oh, can you do this as you're here?" "Oh yeah, I'll go." I never said no. That was the big thing. "Can you write a brass band?" "Yeah." Well, a brass band, for God's sake, you know. Repiano. I've never heard of it. "Oh well, okay, I'll give it a go."
Wow, that's it. So that's a lesson to everybody out there, isn't it? Really, in terms of.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's take it on and give it a go. You know, I mean, I wound up conducting the LSO and the Royal Philharmonic. God knows why. You know, I'm a jazz saxophone player. What am I doing waving my arms at the orchestra? But you had to do it. It was sink or swim, you know.
Yeah.
And I never liked designating when I was when I was composing for film. I never liked other people orchestrating it. And I never particularly liked other people conducting it because it never sounded the way I heard it in my head. Yeah. And for example, when I went to Moscow before Glasnost to do a movie, they wouldn't allow me onto the soundstage, so I had to sit in the booth. And they had a conductor down in the room, and he was great. You know, he was really good, but half the time, you know, I had to be careful because I just didn't want to turn to an interpreter and say, "Actually, I'd prefer it if that happened or that happened." Whereas if I'd have been down there, not that they would have understood me, but at least in Paris, I was able to speak French, which they loved.
Okay, yeah.
Because the Parisian musicians, if you go in there and talk English, they pretend they
can't
the word.
They're not going to like that. No. But well, you know, I think that's a big thing for everyone, that you just got to get involved, haven't you? You got to get on, and got to take things that are in front of you that people think you can do. You know, that if they think you can do something and you feel like giving it a go, and here you are.
Yeah, but usually, you see, when I was doing commercials or film or whatever, I would ask people if they said, "What sort of thing do you want?" And they'd say, "Well, I want a jazzy score." And I'd say, well, what do you mean? Do you mean Louis Armstrong, or do you mean Michael Brecker, or do you mean Ornette Coleman, or do you mean, because people throw these words out and they have no meaning. Country, what's country? Is it Dolly Parton? Is it Hootenanny Banjos?
Exactly.
Is it Merle Haggard? What is it? It's whatever they think it is. So you have to get inside their heads to say, okay, what are you really talking about?
Yeah, completely.
What do you want? If you want a jazz track, are you talking banjos or are you talking funk? It's pinning people down is really important when you're an arranger, definitely.
Yeah. I mean, I've done that on a very small level. So, maybe you'd say, well, you're a bit of an arranger. I'm not an arranger, but I've written some jingles and written some songs for people, and it's exactly that. It's people don't know what they want until you really pin it down and you give them something, don't you?
The great trick, of course, is two tricks are knowing who's the boss, so whose word is the final word.
Right.
But also convincing everyone that you've actually acted on what they've said to give them what they want, although you've really written what you wanted to write.
Yeah, totally. Yeah,
and there's been a couple of occasions where I've had that, you said this, and I thought, that triggered the thought in my mind, and I wrote this, whereas I'd written 6 weeks before that conversation. The joys of corporate music making, the sort of film and TV and commercials by committee.
Oh God, yes. We're sort of talking today in terms of the Rutles a bit. Obviously, you knew Neil before the Rutles, I'm guessing, with Python and other things maybe. When did you first meet Neil?
Well, very strangely, I was at school and the opportunity came up to go on a sort of, I can't even remember what it was called, but it was some sort of like business leaders course, which was highly unlikely that I would ever be on it. I think it's probably a dodge to get out of being at school, But a guy called Mick Robertson, who used to be on Magpie, the children's show, came along and said, we need intelligent sixth formers for a debate on Magpie, like we're going to talk about issues. And I'd gone along with a friend of mine, Keith, and he subsequently built the Emirates Stadium for Arsenal. He was the chief executive. So that weekend benefited him a lot more than it did me, But I went along to do Magpie, and the musical guests were the Bonzos with Spike Milligan.
Right.
And they did the equestrian statue.
Brilliant.
And because I was a musician, I engaged in a little conversation with Neil, but with, not that he would particularly remember it at all. That was 1968. Then we booked the Bonzos when I was at Sussex University. So they came down to play, I think, with Family and Free at the Dome. And I'd grown up with Paul Kossoff, so I was hanging out with him. And again, I saw Neil. I can't remember if I talked to him or not. And then I knew Larry Smith and Keith Moon, and sort of socially.
Of course. How else do you know them? That's right.
Well, socially involved me running away usually, making excuses and leaving. But in 1973, my best friend was Ollie Halsall. And Ollie had just joined Tempest, the John Heisman band with Alan Holdsworth and Mark Clark. Mm-hmm. And I drove him up to the Marquee to do that night's gig. And Neil was in the audience with John Gorman and Muff Winwood, and they were very loud, so we were in the bar, so we could still hear the band, but we were talking in the bar. And Ollie came over to join us, and so it was Ollie and Neil on the break. And Ollie said, we're doing some recording tomorrow for Monty Python. Why don't you come along? Bring your sax. And of course, being of that age, I idolized Monty Python. You know, It's like, seriously, there's an issue here. I'll be there. And went down to the Workhouse Studios, Manfred Mann's place in South London. And all the Pythons were there apart from John Cleese. And Neil had a band, which was Zoot Money, Andy Roberts, Ollie. I assume there was a drummer. I don't remember who it would have been. It might have been John Halsey.
Probably.
It probably would have been.
Yeah.
Anyway, they were doing a spoof of, and I hate to say it, Gary Glitter, who was very big then. They said to me, well, we don't really need saxophone, but do you fancy doing some hand claps and vocals? Which I did. And we hit it off. And Neil and Ollie and I became like socially contact. And then a couple of months later, Neil was doing Recycled Vinyl Blues. The whole joke was that there would be bits of other records in, and there was the Glenn Miller part. So Ollie said, why don't you come and do all the horns on that and arrange it? You know, so I went back again, and again Neil and I hit it off. And from then on, I was like Neil's arranger. You know, I'd sort of morphed into that area, and basically, really, from then till he stopped doing really, you know, record TV and concentrated more on being a live performer, I did everything with him. And even when he started doing live gigs like the Rutles or his solo gigs, I would be there playing, you know. So there was a very strong connection between the two of us. I did all the Guinness Book of Records, and also by default, I did all the Python things. So I did Bright Side of Life, and then I guess when the Rutles came up, it was obvious that I was going to be involved, I guess. I mean, there was never any consideration that anybody else would do what I did in the end. It was always going to be, here's the George Martin era orchestral stuff. Do whatever you feel like, you know, which I did. I never got any direction, well, actually ever from Neil, even in his book of records. He would just send me a piano and voice or guitar and voice, and I'd do whatever I thought worked. So it was a great relationship.
That tells you everything, really, isn't it? You know, that he had that trust in you. And
yeah, it was great. And I would even change things, like Love Life, for example. The demo used the Liberty Bell, the Monty Python Sousa signature tune. Yeah. And I heard it and I said, do you know, I think that's a bit too, you know, whack, 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 whack. We need to be a bit more subtle than that. What about, because the beginning of All You Need Is Love is the Marseillaise, I said, what about something like John Brown's Body, you know, as an intro? Yeah. And I can't even remember if I ran it past Neil or just turned up and did it. Yeah. But whatever it was right. Yeah, that works, you know. Yeah. We never really discussed. I mean, it's incredible, but on 3 series of In His Book of Records and 2 Rutles albums, we never discussed changing anything. Wow. Yeah. That's not quite right. The only thing that happened was on Shangri-La, that big outro. We miscommunicated somehow. And for some reason, I left off the band from it. I just thought it was going to go and fade. And Neil said, oh, no, we want the brass and we want the thing. So I literally, in the studio, I just wrote out lines and, you know, okay. And, of course, all the guys who did it, both brass and string players, were either really into it, or when we did the first Rutles album, it was only 7 years since the Beatles broke up. So all the cellists who were on the Beatles records, you know, who immediately played the way that they played on the Beatles records. And it sounded like it.
It's amazing.
You know, like one of the cellists would say, oh, we didn't go, ba, ba, we went,
yeah.
Thank you very much.
So what I'm interested in is, was it in any way, because it sounds like it's there ready to be made because it's been done before, the sound, and you're sort of copying it. Was there any big challenges doing it at all, or was it quite easy for you?
Not for me. I mean, the only thing that I think was important for me, and it stayed important all the way through, was and Neil always said that there should be and you would know this, he said there should be a verb to ruttle, which would meant to gently parody something with affection.
Yeah.
And that's what we were doing. We weren't sending the Beatles up. It was like a parallel universe. And they got that. George got that. And there's that lovely exchange, which I only heard about recently, which, again, you probably know about, where, I always loved Ollie's solo on Love Life. I thought it was hilarious.
Yeah.
And apparently George said to Neil, that guitar solo Ollie plays on Love Life, are you sending me up? And Neil said, yes. And George went, oh, okay. And that really was it. It was all gentle digs. If they did Penny Lane, the piccolo trumpet solo,
yeah,
I would write something that was sort of gently prodding and a bit silly, but worked, and that balance, we struck that balance. I was thinking about that the other day because it was the 43rd anniversary of us doing Bright Side of Life. I thought that there is nothing in the arrangement that sends it up. Nothing. And when I saw Spamalot, for obvious reasons, they put in send-up parts to the arrangement.
Yeah.
And to me, it just ruined the song because the audience know it's funny.
Yeah.
You don't need to be nudging them to say, hey, here comes something funny. And that's why, for me, the comedy stuff I've worked on, and particularly Neil's music, works so well because you never do that. You're never poking people in the ribs and going, oh, hey, look at this.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? That's the struggle. Neil was a real songwriter. He was, He was truly writing a song. It just happened to have, comedic moments, or topical stuff that he's playing ideas with in a silly way.
Exactly.
But he's writing a real song, and he wants people to hear it and take it for its seriousness as much as the comedy.
Yeah, and people have said, even the Beatles themselves, they said, if the Beatles hadn't happened, the Rutles would have been it, And George said, are the Beatles going to get back together? Well, I hope not, but I hope the Rutles get back together.
Oh, what a world, the Rutles getting back together.
The thing about certainly working with Neil on the Rutles, as you know, it was a very, very quick turnover.
Yeah.
And you didn't really have time to sort of... You just went straight for the, okay, that's a long note at the end of the day in the life. I'm going to have a little piano plonk. Or another day, the string arrangement should sound like this. I'm going to write it. It wasn't like, 6 weeks of agonizing about what am I going to do? How am I going to do it? And I dare say if I'd have had that time, it'd have been harder to do because you really would have been thinking about, how do I parody something and make it funny but not nasty and, fit the tone? And because it was so immediate, it was like, right, Beatles, yeah, Beatles did this, Beatles do that, Rutles will do this. And it was that quick.
It sounds very easy.
Yeah, I don't remember any difficulty at all about it. I listened to the records, but I listened to them maybe once or twice. Because you knew them anyway. Like Neil said, they're part of the fabric of your life. You knew how they went. But, for example, on Double Back Alley, I put in a flute, doubling the tune, because I could hear a flute on Penny Lane for like 4 bars, And Jeff Emmerich, who'd been the assistant engineer on Penny Lane, said, how did you know that there's a flute? He said, that's exactly what happened. A flute player came in, played all the way through, and George said, we'll just use it on that bit. You know?
Right.
So intuitively, I latched on to stuff that actually really did happen.
Wow.
Which is amazing, really.
Yeah. Because, I get, when you think about it, I guess the Beatles, even though they had some, they did have time on their hands in the studio, they were doing that, weren't they? They were experimenting, getting someone in, doing something, then they're going, and, they were still working quite quickly because they were creating all the time, weren't they? Rather than spending agonizing times writing and arranging things. In terms of making the album and then the film coming and passing, and obviously you guys, just carried on, you got other jobs, you go to other jobs and that. And because I was speaking to John Halsey the other day, coming out with the odd little story, and he said when the film and the album happened, from that moment there was a view for him anyway, because he was like a working drummer. There was a view that he'd made it right from an outside view, and he had like a friend calling him up and saying, "Okay, right, we need to get together, we need to chat." And he did. He chatted with him, and he was like saying, "Okay, now." You make sure you get an agent, make sure you get a lawyer. It's like, whoa, it's not real. None of it's real. It's just, it's not a real band. We just did this thing, and now we're off. We're doing other things. We're living our lives. How involved were you with the second album?
Again, I wrote all the arrangements for it, so all the orchestral stuff. So. It was a similar thing. It came up and Neil said, we're revisiting the Rutles, here are the tracks. And again, I just went for what I felt worked. And the only area of whatever was the fact that I hadn't written anything at the end of Shangri-La, but everything else was written out, and again, with no interference, consultation, whatever you want to call it, from Nick. He was in the studio with Steve James doing whatever they did, and I just went away and wrote whatever I felt was right, and showed up in the studio with the music under my arm, and we recorded it, which is the way we always did it. We never demoed anything. In fact, I never demoed anything. All my hit records, I just went in with music and said, do it, Stewart, Tina Turner, James Bond, Titanic, Python, here it is. This is what I've come up with.
So, and I just wondered between the two albums and beyond that as well, is it a thing that because you're a guy that's sort of behind the scenes, and a lot of people wouldn't know who you are. Generally.
No, exactly.
So, which is that's a nice thing, isn't it? A lot of the time.
Well, my book that comes out in February is called The Hidden Man, or Hidden Man, which was Terry Gilliam's drawing of me as the hidden man, the guy who nobody knows.
Put it in your diary now, folks. It's coming out February.
Yeah.
No, I just wondered if that's a thing that people ask you about a lot. If they realise who you are, and if it's a thing that follows you around, or is it because it's a strange thing being part of the Rutles.
It is
when you take, because it's like we don't exist.
Yeah.
It's not a real thing, but it is a real thing. It's strange.
Well, I remember Eric when we had the reunion in LA. He said, "How do you reunite a band that was never together in the first place?"
Yeah.
But no, it became. It's a bit like Bright Side of Life. I did another session that day in the afternoon. I have no idea what it was. I haven't a clue. But it was another working day, and all Neil stuff, however great it was, which it was, and I'm delighted to have been involved with it all, particularly the Rutles. It was another working day. And I was doing a movie at the time, and I was doing commercials, and I was writing for Bjork, and, on the second album, and on the first one, I was Van Morrison's musical director. So I had all these other strings going, not that I wasn't giving attention to everything, but then I think the story of my life has been, well, all these things sort of stuck, I would go to John Martin's house and play flute with Nick Drake. Big deal, I'd talk him out of retiring, not unsuccessfly rather, but 50 years later, they're writing books about him. I didn't know, you're not aware at the time that you're creating something that has a ripple effect for years and years and years. You're just doing it.
Yeah,
so I was never writing, thinking, or playing, I'm taking Bob Marley around London. 50 years time, I'll dine out on that. That was what was happening. Muddy Waters played in my 21st. That's brilliant. But now I'm writing a book. Muddy Waters played at my 21st. Oh, I joined Peter Green when he left Fleetwood Mac. Oh, that was nice. Wow, I joined Peter Green when he left Fleetwood Mac. Exactly. You look back on. I mentored Amy Winehouse. I mentored Amy. Yeah. You look back on these things, and they're what you do to go through life and to have a career in music. I was very lucky because I never did any other job. From the moment, apart from a few weeks supply teaching, from the time I joined Hot Chocolate, say, till today, I've never had to look for work. It's come to me all the way along. So even when I left Van Morrison, we had the Guinness Book of Records, we had Secret Policeman's Ball. I was doing commercials. I did Just a Gigolo, the David Bowie movie. I was doing BBC drama. I did all the Miss Marples and because I had a double career or treble career or a quadruple career, I don't know what you call it, but I was a sax player. I was arranging and conducting for other composers. I was composing on my own as well. I was doing all these things and I never made a distinction. And hopefully till today, I don't make that distinction. So, I composed some big movies like Little Voice and Funny Bones and Beautiful Thing, and Hear My Song. But I also arranged on the new James Bond film, No Time to Die, so I kept that side of my life going rather than saying, like my uncle said, you've got to stop playing saxophone because you're now an arranger or you're a composer, stop arranging. I did them all and I'm very happy to do them all. And they all fueled each other, which was a great thing. As you and everyone, I think, loved working with Neil because, a lot of it was about the wavelengths that you're on with someone, as you know. And if you sort of laugh at the same things and enjoy the same things, you're halfway there because your musical minds sort of attach themselves to each other. People have been posting like clips from the Guinness Book of Records, which I haven't seen for 40 odd years. And they're wonderful. They're wonderful. I mean, the Eurovision send-up could win today.
Totally, yeah. Bing, bang, bong, all that, yeah.
Yeah.
But they're all on YouTube now, aren't they?
I know, yeah.
All the series and everything.
Yeah, and hopefully a lot of the stuff will get out again into more of the public consciousness, as it were, because I always thought that they never quite knew how to pigeonhole Neil. And it should have been as, he wasn't like something I've said a few times, actually, that I think is very important. If you watch, say, a show like Not the 9 O'Clock News, they would do an ABBA parody. And it was very funny. But you would never, ever want to see it again or hear it again. It was, you got the joke, you saw what was funny, gone. The Rutles wasn't like that. Neil's stuff wasn't like that. It wasn't like you see it and you go, ha, 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 what a laugh. Brilliant. Okay, let's move on. It all had a life, as well. And that, I think that's because, as you said, he's a real songwriter. He's not like a parodist in the sense of I don't know, Jake Thackeray or someone like that. It's not like send up songs, that people, Fascinating Ada or someone like that, where you hear it once and you think, that's brilliant, that is so funny, but I don't really want to hear it ever again. I'm not going to add it to my iTunes playlist, sort of Spotify. No, it's a joke. And I think that was my thing about going to see Spamalot. You know, Bright Side of Life was a joke, and in the film, it's more than a joke. It's and it wouldn't have the impact it's had if it wasn't more than a joke. If it had been a throwaway, you know, bagatelle that, oh yeah, right, let's have this stupid song now at the end of the film.
No,
it wouldn't have had the life it had. And incredibly, I mean, I remember ringing Terry Jones at the time and having got Eric's demo, and I said, we're going to record it, you know, how much do you need for the film? He said about 20 seconds. I rang Eric and said, Terry says he wants 20 seconds. And I won't say what Eric said, but it's not unprintable. But we got our way. And the rest is history, you know.
The second album, in some ways, I mean, not to a Rutles fan, but in some ways is sort of less known about, I think, because it wasn't connected to the film, was it?
No, that was a whole interesting time, because as you know, there was a thing between, I mean, it's no secret that between Eric and Neil that I actually tried to get in the middle of and diffuse. Not very successfully, but I was there when the whole thing started, which was during the American Python 25th celebrations when we were all together in Los Angeles.
Right.
And we did the first Rutles gig at the Troubadour. And somehow, you know, that sort of soured a lot of what went on before and after and whatever. But I think archaeology really came out at that sort of time when because of the sort of rocky relationship between Eric and Neil, it sort of didn't get the attention that it should have got. You know, I think that's probably the problem. And again, it's had a sort of sleeper life, you know, which is great, because all these years later, it's actually, I told you so'd to a lot of people who at the time, oh, you know, who wants another Rutles, you know, come on, don't. And I think that's a good thing, you know, that basically both the film and both albums have stood the test of time. You know, it's. I've never been one for "I told you so"s. You know, I mean, or it should have been, or it could have been, or you know, if I don't get something or something doesn't happen, I don't dwell on it and sort of fester. But I'm very glad the opposite happens, and things that you think, oh well, you know, we did it. It's a shame. Shame it's not going to go anywhere. And then 30 years later, it's people are talking about it and buying it and
it's
asking you
thing.
about
I mean,
it.
that's the thing. If it's not about money, it's okay, because you know people can just enjoy it and people are enjoying it, and that's what it's there for. It's about people enjoying it. And I do wonder, because obviously you cross paths with you know, the Beatles. And George was obvious that, you know, he was already in it, but. Did you ever have like reactions from either the Beatles or like? I think George Martin spoke to you once, didn't he?
He did. I mean, I was introduced to him at their studios by Don Black, and Don said, "Oh, this is John Altman." You know, George said, "Oh, I know who John Altman is." Sort of nodding. But no, I got on well with George, and both Georges. And George Harrison used to sing one of the phrases from Bright Side of Life that I wrote to greet me. He never said hello. I'd written a little string figure, you know, that went ba-da-dee-da-da-da-da-da-da. And he mixed the original single of Bright Side of Life. And he took the whistle out so that you could hear that. So if you hear the record, there's no whistle there. It's just my string line, and he'd sing that. But no, I found out. Again, it's pretty common knowledge. You know, John liked it. Linda McCartney liked it. Paul was didn't like the way he was portrayed, but he came round. And Ringo was converted to it. He liked the later stuff. He liked the stuff I did. But I get the most extraordinary reaction because if I meet people, you know, other musicians who I admire a hell of a lot, and that somehow comes up, their whole attitude changes to me. You know, you can see it. It's incredible. Oh, I did the. Oh my God, you did the Rutles.
It's the strangest thing, isn't it? It's like magic dust.
Well, I had that with Jeff Beck. You know, I mean, sort of, we're talking, and he played in my band. You know, I mean, he played on Secret Policeman's Ball. And we're talking, and you know, we got on Spinal Tap, obviously, and they loved it. They absolutely loved the Rutles. You know, in fact, Rob Reiner said to me, "We're two peas in a pod."
Yeah,
because you know, the Rutles and Spinal Tap. That's where we came from. But no, the reaction of you know, jazz players and you know, rock icons, amazing. As soon as you get Rutles, they party.
You're in that little sort of like cult thing that, you know, if you know about it, it's like, wow, this big thing. But it doesn't. In some ways, it doesn't exist. It's just bizarre.
No, it's very strange. But it's like the whole Python thing. You know, it's sort of. I don't know. I look back on having been involved with them, you know, and it's a funny time now, as you know, because a lot of flack is directed at the white middle class, upper middle class comedians, you know, no place for them. And I feel like saying to people, for God's sake, they're funny, you know. What don't you get about people who are funny? Who cares what they look like, come from, you know, it doesn't matter. You know, they are funny. And that's the bottom line, you know. There's sort of the same with music, you know. Why make a distinction about who's making the music, you know?
Yeah.
It's good music or it's bad music. It doesn't matter who's playing it, you know, or who's singing it. It's good, it's bad. This is simple thing.
Yeah, I mean, you probably wouldn't know anything about me, really, in terms of what apart from seeing me play in the Rutles a bit. I'm like an aficionado of Jerry Lee Lewis and all that rock and roll stuff. Like yourself, I'm a man with no hair, first of all, and I can put some shades on now and then, that sort of thing. But I'm not the most rock and roll looking person. But I try to think that I do it very authentically. You know, I was going to say, half the time when I turn up at a gig with my band, you know, they think the guitarist is the singer because he's got frilly hair and he's got, you know, it looks a bit like Elvis, whatever. There you go.
Well, it's funny. I got to play with the original Comets on the 50th anniversary Rock Around the Clock.
Right.
And with Little Richard, who I got on with. So I played years of charity cricket. What started out as Eric Clapton's team and then became the Bunburys. And we were playing one match. It was against Norma Major's team. And there's a point to this story, by the way. The opening bowler for Norma Major's team was Richard Snell, who was a South African Test cricketer. And that's important because Brian Close said the two people coming out to bat, one is a member of the Rolling Stones and one is an ex-England Test cricketer. And the two batsmen were Chris Broad, who was a Test batsman, and Bill Wyman. Now, Richard Snell, being South African, had never seen the Rolling Stones. And Chris Broad had this sort of Roger Daltrey, shaggy, long hairdo, and Bill Wyman looked like a sort of decrepit old cricketer. So Richard started bowling sort of gentle lobs at Chris Broad, and then when Bill got up the other end, he was pinging him with bouncers. Bill standing there going, "Oi, you know, what's going on here?" And Richard said at the end, I had no idea. You know, I saw this tall, good-looking bloke and thought he's.
So it works on both levels. You're
instead.
either a good cricketer or you're not. You know, it's either good cricket or isn't. There you go.
Yeah. I thought that was a wonderful moment, you know. Sort of.
Oh, that's brilliant. But is there anything you'd like me to play? I could play like a little snippet of in a gap or something of an arrangement.
Well, I mean, in terms of Rutles, I mean, really anything that I did, which is the orchestral stuff onwards, I love it. You know, I mean, I'm really proud of it all.
So I might play a couple of things that I used to like playing, because that's the thing. That's the other thing. I'm the Rutling Symphony Orchestra when I'm playing, and I'm emulating, you know, what you did on those records.
No, that's great. I mean, in fact, when we did the Troubadour, because I think we did 2 nights. The first night we had a string quartet led by Bruce Dukoff, who was the concertmaster of the Hollywood Bowl, and was also, or still is, John Williams' orchestral leader. And Bruce's first ever session as a 17-year-old was on the Guinness Book of Records.
Yeah.
Playing violin for me when he was 17. Now, he's American, but he was studying in London, you know. So he gladly came out and did that. And then we had a big brass section. So we played all the Rutles arrangements, and then Greg Fillinganes on piano, being Billy Preston. It was wonderful. But the second night we didn't have the brass and strings, so I had to do what you did. I had to play everything. I had my saxophone, and I had to play I think I played the piccolo trumpet solo on my sax, but I played all the string lines and brass lines on the synth, you know.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And that was the second night. Oh, funny, the first night of the Troubadour, Julian Lennon came down. That's right. As did Harry Shearer, I think Mike McKean. I can't remember Steve Martin and Robin. Oh, Jeff Lynne came. You know, so we really had a sort of discerning audience. You know, knew what they should be listening to, and it went down really well.
Brilliant. So. Well, I tell you what, you know, if I'd have known at the time, because I remember you coming to see us. I think it had been in London.
Probably the 100 Club, was it?
No, when I was playing, we played. It was the Garage, I think.
Right.
Yeah,
yes.
When I saw you, I don't know if you came to another one, but at the time, I didn't realise, quite how involved in what you'd done. So, and you were there, and I was playing those parts, quite sort of ignorantly, just playing them. No one's gonna know if I play a funny note or whatever, But then there's the guy.
It sounded fine to me.
The guy is in the audience. There he is, who arranged all these things, and I'm playing. That's a bizarre thing to think about.
Well, it's very funny because I think it was something about Neil's being shy, but every time I came to a gig, he would never, ever acknowledge me as being there.
Right, okay.
Ever. And I don't think it's because he's being nasty. I just think he was sort of shy of, sort of saying hello, guess what, in the audience is so-and-so. Yeah. But
well, he was shy of himself, it seemed, as well.
Totally.
He was so happy when we were, in the last sort of version of the band. He was so happy that we all started because he wanted us to take a song, sing this song, sing that song, and he would he'd play second fiddle, if he could. Well, he loved that because that made us more of a band in that way as well.
Yeah,
because it wasn't all about him.
No, it really did. It really did. And I think it's something he carried all the way along, going back to when I knew him, with Ian Wallace and that band and Dennis Cowan and then going back to the Bonzos, he sort of self-effaced.
Totally. Yeah. Well, I hope in these times that I know people are working hard to get all this stuff together.
Yeah,
and hopefully do some more things with it in a more controlled, projected way, so people can actually hear it and take in and hear it anew, hear it for the first time and take it in.
Yeah, no, that's great.
But anyway, John, it's been fantastic talking to you.
Brilliant.
And seeing you. I'm the only person seeing you on this radio program, but it's been fantastic seeing you.
Right.
And I hope I'll see you again, either at a gig or wherever. And
yeah.
Thanks, John. I appreciate it very much.
No, my pleasure.